Support for this program comes from the Gail and Tom Vinson Charitable Foundation, committed to funding educational causes.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villery.
We count on Informed Sources to continue the discussion on important local issues.
It's where our top journalists discuss stories they've covered.
Stay informed with Informed Sources.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, staging vehicle wrecks for insurance payouts is a serious enough crime. This week, we saw the beginning of a trial for a related crime that's even worse, murder. At the New Orleans Police Department, payroll fraud has been investigated, only it was police officers who were the subjects. Arrests on multiple counts have been made. We'll look at these stories as well as the demolition of a former hospital and its impact on a neighborhood, as well as a challenge to the industry of hemp-based products. Those stories and increased concerns about foodborne illnesses are topics for our Informed Sources. Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. Rich Collins, staff writer of the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And Mike Perlstein, a freelance journalist and former investigative reporter for WWL Louisiana. Mike, we're going to go on over to you because there's been news coming out of the New Orleans Police Department a little bit too frequently, really, about payroll fraud involving officers.
Yeah, my old beat back at Channel 4, and back when I was there last year, I had been hearing about just persistent red flags, excessive overtime, many police officers being named. It was kind of a situation that was, hiding in plain sight. You could always get the records and see who's raking in the most overtime, and the amounts were just exorbitant. And finally, we're now seeing investigations into this excessive overtime, and as you mentioned, criminal charges. Mm-hmm. And some of the scenarios are just really head-scratching. You had Chad Cockerham, for example, claiming he was an officer assigned to the FBI task force, meaning he didn't have to report to any kind of district station, but worked remotely through a laptop, real-time crime camera center. He was claiming 16-hour days. That's 8 hours of overtime each day for almost an entire year, and racking up way more overtime than his actual salary. That raised red flags, but it didn't lead to any kind of charges against him until he was fired on an unrelated situation in which they dinged him for untruthfulness related to a scandal on promotional tests. But they're still deeply looking at his payroll. The Inspector General's been all over it.
And he's not the only one.
No, and so that was one of the first that got named. Just now it's really picking up steam as the Inspector General, like I said, and state police start really diving into this, as well as PIB, the police, Internal Affairs Department. And just in July, they fired and referred a criminal investigation to the U.S. Attorney's Office of an officer, actually a Sergeant, Henry Burke, been there for years and years. $286,000 earned last year in 2025, most of it in overtime. And he's someone who did have to report so they could actually check to see if he was, at the station doing police work during all of these hours that he claimed. And then just last week, even higher escalation of this was an officer, Brandon Coleman, and he's now charged an exorbitant number of counts, 325 counts of filing false public records for all of this overtime that he claimed. And he's someone who got caught in this new system of biometric, checks on officers to see if he's physically at the station responding to calls. And turned out he was not reporting at 7 a.m. for roll call. He was at his house. They have some video of him going to work hours after he's on, the timesheet and collecting money. He I guess they're claiming he made $110,000 in fraudulent overtime. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. If you look at the reports by the Inspector General, they were finding that there was almost, either no or little oversight, and if there was any, that it was just being signed and waved through despite these exorbitant amounts.
And so this, of course, has an impact on the city's overall budget problem, too. I mean, one of the issues was overtime, maybe not just NOPD, but overtime that put them in such a budget crunch.
And look, just, as a tax-paying citizen, much less, a reporter, I have some big questions when you have a city that is in dire financial straits, putting employees on, furlough just to, balance this budget, and the police department with runaway overtime, unchecked. How does this happen? It's not like the financial troubles of the city weren't known while these officers are racking up all this overtime, clearly in many cases documented, not working. For example, Chad Cockerham, he's claiming he's working these 16-hour days while on vacations, while at Saints games, on a cruise, and he said, well, I had my laptop and I punch in and do work.
Because he's with a task force with the FBI, and he said he was doing work all the time.
But the question needs to be raised for the supervisors of these officers, all the way up to Chief Ann Kirkpatrick, and the city CAO, where are the controls?
All right, but the overtime cost, the amount has dropped so far, the past 6 months or so.
The Inspector General started looking at this and making recommendations. They say that the overtime costs for the first 6 months of this year down almost 50% from 2025. So when you start to scrutinize and put under the the spotlight and charging police officers with crimes, you get some results.
Well, and I imagine last year, the first 6 months, there was a lot of overtime because of the incident in the quarter. So there should have been a whole lot of extra overtime in last year's first half that didn't exist this year.
That's right. Some of it's justified, but in these instances, and they're now able, and they are checking to see if officers are where they say they are when they sign those timesheets.
So it's being scrutinized much more closely.
Intensely.
Okay. All right, Mike, thanks a lot. Rich, let's go on over to you because the demolition has started at the former Lindy Boggs Hospital, which is kind of a heartbreak for some people, but at the same time, particularly folks in that neighborhood are saying, thank goodness it's happening.
It was interesting. I got a mix of emotions. So I went to the press conference on Tuesday at 10 a.m. where the mayor said a few words, and along with some other, the developers and some city council folks, and then she like had this, one of those like air horns. She blew the horn, and they sprayed the hose, and they had these giant excavators. They literally just ripped apart a brick wall of the building in front of all of us. So I think there's a feeling that this had to happen. But I talked to a lot of people, especially people who've lived in Mid-City for decades, where you remember Mercy Hospital or Mercy Baptist, and when I lived in there, I remember going there for emergencies over the years, and it was kind of a very bustling corner of the city. So it's a loss for sure. But no, the general sense was the developers could not, in 21 years, come up with any kind of financing, whether through the tax credits, through this and that, the other. The layout of the building was complicated to redevelop. So ultimately, bringing it down was the best way to start fresh and actually bring that back into commerce. Interesting detail, you all see the graffiti, the street art that's all over the outside of the building. Well, there's a lot of very elaborate art inside the building, and I thought this was a classy touch. Paul Flower, the lead developer, he had a team of photographers go through and document all of the artwork inside the building. They turned it into a book called The Art of Mercy, and they gave a copy to the mayor at the press conference. But I went on the paper's archive and looked at a story we did in November. Some of the it's amazing. It's really beautiful. So in any case, it's a big moment. There were concerns from some of the neighbors about environmental hazards during demolition. The developers talked about they're spending a few months on the mitigation and removing asbestos. before they actually pull everything down. But there are concerns from several of the neighbors about noise and just hazards over the next year.
No, that whole facility has been just empty and getting worse by the day since Hurricane Katrina. And like you said, there have been various attempts to try to rehabilitate it in some sort of way, redevelop it. But they decided it had to come down. So when will it finally be down? What's
so this whole project they're doing is about a year, but that's because at the end of the mitigation and demolition, they are doing something cool. They're taking that subsurface basement that and anyone who's driven down Bienville, sometimes you look over there, you can see water down there over the years, not now necessarily. But they're going to essentially create a water retention tank feature that Paul Flowers said could, depending on the storm, reduce the street flooding in that area by up to a foot. And they're creating it in a way where they can also still drive create the foundations, do the pilings and things for a future project.
So what are the plans for future use? Do we know?
They do know they're planning a mixed use, some kind of apartments. It's possibly a combination of affordable and market rate, retail, offices. That's right now they've sort of on a napkin math is $100 million project. They say they are going to use the next year while they're doing the mitigation and demolition to finalize the plan and get the money together to do it. So that won't start until a year from now, and so who knows?
And just in addition to being blighted and an eyesore, I can tell you that was a favorite spot for kids and high school kids to sneak in, roam around, graffiti or no graffiti. I can tell you personally, my kids reported being there with a gang of friends. So good thing that that's coming down, I think.
Yeah.
I absolutely agree. A decade ago, I remember one of my teenagers went and did a photo project in there, and I'm like, you did what?
And you got in there, how?
I was like, I was very upset. But
so, no matter what security fences they put up, the kids always find a way to get in.
They can find a way. And I will say, the business owners like the Chado restaurant, the Thai restaurant that's directly across the street from the front entrance, those guys are so excited. It's Bayou Beer Garden, Parkway Bakery, Neo's. Yeah. So the whole neighborhood has been on the rise.
It definitely has, and that's what he's going to talk about right now. I mean, it's sad to see a structure that had been a beloved hospital for so long that had to come down, but its impact on the neighborhood, which is in mid-city, this whole now the renovation, the reuse of that land.
Yeah, this thing was originally something called Mercy Hospital, which was built in the 1950s by the Sisters of Mercy, whose original hospital was on Annunciation, and that was built in 1926. But during the Mercy Hospital glory days, that was sort of like a doctor's row, like a lot of the offices along the way were just along there. Just as downtown in its prime, you have a lot of doctor's offices, and that gradually started to deteriorate. And I was wondering why. I mean, why did the doctors leave that area? Because there's not enough people. And part of it, I think, is probably with the expansion of the suburbs. When you started to have more medical facilities in hospitals in the suburbs, the people who were living there were moving out. That might be in the beginning. But it was a nice-looking hospital, as I recall. But then when it went under, for a while it was called Mercy Baptist Hospital. And then the Lindy Box Hospital. Right. It's an ugly building today. I mean, I drove by this morning. I mean, all that graffiti is just hideous. It kind of reminds, it really shut down after Katrina, and so it's just been there like that since Katrina. It kind of reminds me of like a grizzly bear sleeping at the door of a cave, and you can't do anything. Nobody wants to go in. Nobody wants to go out. There was nothing to do with that property, which could be a wonderful piece of property right by Bienville and Norman C. Francis. So the potential is enormous. You go up Bienville toward Carrollton, there's a lot of restaurants and shops that are struggling that can do a lot better because of this. And so, and there's one block that was a residential block that was converted into condos and apartments. So I think you can see a lot of that. So once this goes down and they put something, I think there's a good potential for that block, but right now it's just being held back by that property.
It also connects to the
Greenway,
it runs along there, and so there's a lot of potential for development. Sidney Torres Fourth has some apartment developments there, so You know, it's attracting investment.
Definitely an evolving urban neighborhood for the positive. Okay, E, thanks a lot. And we're going to go over to Dawn right now because we've been hearing too much about maybe don't eat the lettuce, lady.
Don't eat the lettuce, don't eat the jalapenos, don't eat the eggs, don't eat the prepackaged guacamole. No, seriously, we have been tracking E. coli, salmonella, and cyclospora outbreaks. And they are larger than they have been before. It's not your imagination. Sometimes you're like, well, how many counts are there usually? Usually, last year in the United States, there were 1,180 cases of cyclospora. This year to date, there have been 13,895, including more than 100 cases right here in Louisiana. That's the germ that was linked to the packaged lettuce. And then it was linked to some Taco Bell restaurants. Here in Louisiana, it was never necessarily connected to Taco Bell, but it was a packaged lettuce that came from Taylor Farms that was sold under a variety of names, not just Taylor Farms, but in Walmart, in Whole Foods, in Trader Joe's. You know, it's not just one place. The experts say, don't be scared to eat. Pay attention to FDA and USDA recalls. The Louisiana Department of Health does a very good job of monitoring those recalls and alerting restaurants and stores. Any of the bad lettuce that was sold that contained this bug should have already gone bad by now. If you're still eating shredded iceberg lettuce that was sold in mid-July, you're going to get sick from something else. So that one's probably going to be okay. The next outbreak that we heard about was a salmonella outbreak that came from jalapenos that were distributed to restaurants and food suppliers from an area of Mexico called Sinaloa, Mexico. That restaurants have cooperated with that one and pulled it all off the shelves. Your best bet if you're eating out or eating at home is just to check labels and check the website for the FDA or the USDA and what is recalled. Can I eat it? Because there's a frozen blueberry recall that had some E. coli. And if you check, right now it feels like there's this heightened awareness because there are 3 different viruses through, all these different food sources. There's always a little bit of something going on. Your best bet with your food is to carefully wash your produce. Things that can be cooked or should be cooked, cook them to their full temperature so that you are burning off any of the germs. A lot of it, you're not going to get sick for a couple of weeks, so it's really hard to track what you ate, when you ate it, what actually made you sick. But if you do get sick and you think it's from food you ate, you're urged to report it to the Louisiana Department of Health so that they can keep track.
So can you order a salad at a restaurant?
You can.
Can we feel
you can.
comfortable doing that?
I ate jalapenos the other day too. And
Okay.
So far, so good.
So far, so good.
All right, Don, thanks a lot. All right, Mike, let's go on over to you because there's a federal trial going on right now that's related to the slammer cases, cars running into 18-wheelers. Now, we had one trial already, 2 lawyers convicted on that, but this is different. It's a separate trial, and it's for a more serious case.
Yeah, different, obviously related, all part of the same case that I've called highway robbery since I broke the story back in 2019 with Channel 4. And this is really the pinnacle. It looks like this will be the last of the prosecutions. After 58 guilty pleas, 3 people convicted at that trial in March, including 2 attorneys, Vanessa Mata and Jason Giles of the King Law Firm. But now, as I was covering this story, it took the dark turn in 2020 when one of the federal informants who had been a slammer, intentionally ramming into 18-wheelers, apparently did, up to 100 of these cases and delivered it to attorneys who would pursue fraudulent lawsuits. A guy named Cornelius Garrison, gunned down at his home in front of his mom in Gentilly, murdered. That wasn't solved for 4 years. But now we are seeing the trial of the person who allegedly ordered the hit, Sean Alfordish. He is the fiance of Vanessa Mata, the attorney who was convicted back in March, as well as the alleged trigger man, Leon Chunky Parker. And right now we're in the first week of what should be a multi-week trial. The drama is pretty thick. It's 2 trials in one because there are fraud charges on Sean Alfordish as well as the murder on the 2 of them. The opening of the trial included the sister of Cornelius Garrison, choking back tears on the loss of her brother in such a tragic way. They had a police body cam of the interview with Cornelius Garrison's mom, and it was recounted right at the opening statement by the prosecution. Cornelius Garrison's last words were, "Mama, get on the floor," as he saw a gunman in his face when he opened that door. So a lot of drama in what had been this massive fraud, hundreds of millions of dollars. I think they estimated more than 200 staged accidents, became something much more sinister with a murder. It already stood as the largest prosecution in the country of staged accidents. It wasn't created here, but New Orleans, takes something, and New Orleans has a way of giving it that little extra kick, and it has become this just sprawling case. And look, from the witness stand, you're seeing the people who previously pleaded guilty, people who were in those packed cars admitting, yep, made it all up. We intentionally hit that truck. I claimed a back injury, the non-existent phantom injury, and even went so far as to get surgery on non-existent injuries to up the payout.
So one of the lawyers convicted, Mata, who has the relationship with Al Fordish, is she going to be tied into this trial at all, or even the other attorney?
So far she is not tied in. She has been convicted of multiple counts of fraud, including conspiracy to commit fraud, for her role in taking these cases. The jury found that she was knowingly taking fraudulent cases to court, even to trial in some cases. She's awaiting sentencing. It would appear that right now she had no role. She's never been charged with any role in the murder. However, there is one key person who was originally charged with the murder by the name of Ryan Harris, nicknamed Red. Originally, he was pegged as the trigger man by the feds. He cut a deal. He pleaded guilty to a role in the murder in exchange for a 35-year sentence. And he pointed the finger at this father-in-law figure, man who was dating his mom, as the real trigger man. So we haven't seen it yet this week, but it does look like a lot of this is going to boil down to this one key witness, Ryan Harris, pointing the finger of guilt at the defendant, Leon Parker. Of course, not surprisingly, the defense, as we heard in the opening statement from Leon Parker's attorney, was it was Ryan Harris all along, and he's just trying to frame this, defendant to get a reduction from a life sentence down to 35 years.
And so the trial continues. How long do you think this trial is going to last?
They gave it 20 working days, so that's 4 weeks of actual, trial days. It's kind of slow, but it looks like next week they're really going to get into the meat and potatoes on the murder itself. Right now we're hearing a lot about the fraud, which that's a lot of witnesses who previously testified at that trial in March where the fraud was proven. They do have a pretty overwhelming amount of evidence. But it's interesting. At that trial, the defense of Vanessa Mata was, it was all Sean Al Fordish. It was all Sean Al Fordish. He had been the disbarred attorney, older guy who, had connections to the street-level slammers. Now it's completely flipped around at this trial where Sean Al Fordish, through his attorney, is saying it was all Vanessa Mata. She's the lawyer. She signed all the papers. Wasn't him. So it's going to be interesting and pretty dramatic now that there's a murder at the middle of it all.
Right, indeed. And she is actually imprisoned.
Yes. Now that's an interesting little wrinkle that rather than stay out on bond waiting for sentencing, Judge Wendy Vitter remanded her to be locked up immediately because, according to the judge, she felt that at least she knew or acquiesced in the murder, and that's why she's still locked up.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll continue to see what's going on with that in the weeks ahead. Okay, Rich, let's go to you and wrap it up, because right now there's some federal legislation that has some people pretty upset. They don't want to see it pass.
Right. So there's a 2018 farm bill that more or less accidentally legalized these hemp-derived THC products. So whether it's gummy bears or beverages or other products made from hemp instead of marijuana, which it contains less concentration of the psychoactive compound. entrepreneurs quickly realized you could just use a lot of hemp to get enough THC to create a similar effect that you would get from, the compound you get from marijuana. So in Louisiana, every state ended up with a patchwork of its own regulations. In Louisiana, we ended up having these hemp beverages popped onto the market in around 2023. There's about maybe a dozen different makers of these products. There's 3 big ones. And the biggest is Crescent Canna, headquartered uptown. It's actually, by some metrics, the biggest manufacturer of hemp-derived THC beverages in the country. So everything was going along swimmingly. You can see these products in some bars, some restaurants, every Rouse's store, Total Wine. They're on the shelf.
People are buying them and consuming them, in other words. So this legislation will get rid of it?
Right. So it's a $1 billion industry. What happened was Mitch McConnell and some other legislators last fall decided to close the loophole from the 2018 bill. So they essentially created what amounts to a ban of THC-derived hemp products, which is set to go into effect on November 13th of this year. The industry's been working behind the scenes trying to save itself. The big news from over the weekend was that the U.S. Senate voted to extend by 4 weeks that ban. Congress still hasn't voted on it, but the folks here in town, there's a new a trade group that's formed in Louisiana. They're taking it as a positive sign that at the federal level, lawmakers will embrace regulation over an outright ban. But it's really anybody's guess what's going to happen.
And Rich, from your reporting, we learned that the industry is now big enough to hire lobbyists.
There's lobbyists. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, they banded together. They sent out a survey, and of course, they got, I think 11,000 people wrote the senators the week before the previous week to speak in favor.
Okay, so we'll see what goes along with that. All right, E, we're going to go around the table, starting with you.
Well, November 3rd is the federal election day, and all around the country, people looking at their congressional districts between Republicans and Democrats. In Louisiana, I don't think there's any doubt that most of the people are going to be elected to the party that they belong to. But the big question is in Louisiana, too, because the 2 most powerful members of Congress, Mike Johnson, the Speaker, and Steve Scalise, the Majority Leader, are really on an edge right now. There's 218 Republicans and 213 Democrats and a few who are independent. And so it's a possibility that there could be a swing and that they could be in the minority.
Okay, all right. Dawn, over to you.
Heat advisory again all weekend this weekend, so stay in because it's football season. Preseason starts this weekend, so enjoy the air conditioning and enjoy your first look at the Saints.
All righty. Rich, over to you.
I'm writing a fun story right now about Hoda Kotb, our former New Orleans news anchor. She launched a business last year called Joy 101, which is a web app and events to help teach people about breath work and meditation and all these things to try and just enjoy life. There's a New Orleans angle to the story that I can't reveal yet because it's under embargo, but that will be one of my innovation stories for next week.
Okay, very good. Mike, real quick.
I'm excited to announce that I've joined a documentary production team on my story, Highway Robbery.
Okay.
This major case, obviously still waiting for the outcome of this trial, but it's a serious operation, and it looks like a possible multi-part series, documentary, journalism on every twist and turn that has happened in this case.
Well, you certainly do know every twist and turn. You've been on it from the beginning. All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us. See you again next week from Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
Informed Sources is made possible in part by Susie and Pierre G. Villeray.
We count on Informed Sources to continue the discussion on important local issues.
It's where our top journalists discuss stories they've covered.
Stay informed with Informed Sources.
Support for this program comes from the Gail and Tom Benson Charitable Foundation, committed to funding educational causes.